Glass shattered against the marble steps of City Hall as another bottle exploded in a spray of amber fragments. The crowd surged forward like a living beast, their faces twisted with fear and rage, while police in riot gear formed a human barricade between the mob and the building's imposing columns. Detective Sarah Chen pressed her back against the cold stone wall, watching in horror as her peaceful community tore itself apart over a lie that had spread faster than wildfire through social media and whispered conversations. Just 48 hours earlier, Riverside Heights had been the kind of suburban paradise where neighbors borrowed sugar and children played freely in tree-lined streets. The city prided itself on diversity, with tree-shaded avenues where mosque minarets stood alongside church steeples, where Korean barbecue restaurants neighbored Italian bakeries, and where the monthly community meetings actually drew respectable crowds of engaged citizens. Dr. Amira Hassan had moved to Riverside Heights 3 years ago, drawn by the community's reputation for tolerance and the excellent medical facilities at Riverside General Hospital. Her infectious disease specialty had made her invaluable during the recent flu outbreaks, and her warm bedside manner had earned her a devoted following among patients who appreciated her careful attention to their concerns. She lived quietly in a modest 2-story house on Elm Street, tending to her rose garden and volunteering at the local free clinic every Saturday morning. The trouble had started, as many troubles do, with something seemingly insignificant. The monthly community meeting on a humid Tuesday evening in August had drawn its usual crowd of 40 or 50 residents to discuss the proposed renovation of Riverside Park. The air conditioning in the community center had failed earlier that day, leaving the room stifling despite the whirring fans that provided little relief from the oppressive heat. Karen Williams had arrived late, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair slightly wilted from the humidity, her designer handbag clutched tightly in her manicured fingers. She had been a fixture at these meetings for the past 5 years, ever since her divorce settlement had left her financially comfortable and chronically dissatisfied. At 52, she possessed the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never having been truly challenged, combined with the dangerous combination of too much time and too little purpose. "I still don't understand why we're spending taxpayer money on that section of the park," Karen had said, her voice cutting through the discussion like a blade. "Nobody uses those picnic areas except certain people who don't even live in our neighborhood." The room had fallen silent. Everyone knew exactly what she meant by certain people. The picnic areas she referenced were popular with the mosque community for their weekend gatherings, and with several Latino families who lived in the affordable housing complex on the eastern edge of the district. Dr. Hassan, who had been sitting quietly in the third row, had raised her hand. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the slight accent that revealed her Syrian heritage, though she had been an American citizen for over a decade. "Mrs. Williams, those families pay taxes too. Their children deserve safe places to play just as much as anyone else's children do." Karen's face had flushed red, visible even in the dim lighting of the overheated room. She was not accustomed to being corrected, especially not by someone she considered an outsider. "Easy for you to say," Karen had snapped back. "You people always stick together, don't you? Always looking for handouts from hard-working Americans." The meeting had dissolved into uncomfortable murmurs and hasty adjournments, but the damage was done. Dr. Hassan had left with her dignity intact, but her heart heavy, while Karen had stormed out, her humiliation burning like acid in her chest. 2 days later, Karen made the phone call that would change everything. The 911 dispatcher, Maria Rodriguez, had been working the night shift for 6 years. She had heard every kind of emergency call imaginable, from the tragic to the bizarre. But the frantic voice that came through her headset at 11:47 p.m. on Thursday night was something entirely new. 911. What's your emergency? They've poisoned the water. Karen's voice was high and breathless, crafted to sound panicked. That Muslim doctor, Hassan or whatever her name is, she's done something to our water supply. People are getting sick all over the neighborhood. Maria had paused, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. Ma'am, can you be more specific? What symptoms are people experiencing? Nausea, vomiting, horrible stomach cramps. My neighbor called me 20 minutes ago, and her whole family was affected. This is terrorism, and we need help right now. The word terrorism triggered automatic protocols. Within minutes, Maria had dispatched emergency medical services, contacted the police department, and initiated the chain of command that would eventually reach the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force. The city's emergency management system, designed to respond swiftly to genuine threats, began moving with frightening efficiency. By midnight, rumors were spreading through social media like spilled gasoline meeting a lit match. Karen had been busy on her phone, calling neighbors, posting on Facebook groups, and sending carefully worded text messages that suggested without explicitly stating that Dr. Hassan had deliberately contaminated the municipal water supply. Just heard from reliable sources that our water might be compromised. Read one of her posts. Strange coincidence that the only infectious disease doctor in town happens to be from that part of the world. Stay safe, everyone. Stick to bottled water until we know more. The first emergency room visits began around 1 a.m. Riverside General Hospital, where Dr. Hassan worked, saw a steady stream of worried residents complaining of nausea and stomach pain. The night staff, already stretched thin, found themselves overwhelmed by dozens of patients convinced they had been poisoned. The symptoms, Dr. Hassan realized with growing alarm, were entirely consistent with mass psychogenic illness, the power of suggestion manifesting as very real physical distress. Dr. Hassan herself had been at the hospital when the crisis began, finishing up paperwork from her evening shift. She watched in bewilderment as colleagues whispered among themselves and security guards began eyeing her with suspicious glances. When her supervisor, Dr. Michael Brennan, approached her at 2 a.m. with an uncomfortable expression, she knew something was terribly wrong. Amira, I need to ask you to go home tonight. There have been some allegations made, and until we can sort this out, it's better if you're not here. Allegations. Doctor. Hassan's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she set down her pen. What kind of allegations? Doctor. Brennan couldn't meet her eyes. Someone has suggested that you might have been involved in contaminating the water supply. I know it's ridiculous, but with all these patients coming in. The words hit her like a physical blow. Dr. Hassan had dedicated her life to healing, had spent countless hours saving lives and comforting the sick. The suggestion that she would harm anyone was so absurd, so contrary to everything she believed, that for a moment she couldn't even process it. Michael, you know me. You've worked with me for 3 years. How could you even consider? I don't consider it, he said quickly. But the board is scared. And with all the media attention this is getting, they want to avoid any appearance of impropriety. It's just temporary, until this gets resolved. Dr. Hassan gathered her belongings with as much dignity as she could muster, aware that dozens of eyes were following her every movement. As she walked through the hospital corridors where she had saved countless lives, She felt like a pariah in her own workplace. Outside, the parking lot was beginning to fill with news vans. Someone had leaked the story to the media, and by dawn, satellite trucks from 3 major networks had set up camp outside the hospital. The headlines were already writing themselves in the producers' minds. Local doctor suspected in water contamination terror plot. Friday morning brought chaos. Mayor Robert Chen, no relation to Detective Sarah Chen, had called an emergency city council meeting, while the health department began conducting rush tests on water samples from throughout the municipality. The tests would take at least 48 hours to complete, but fear doesn't wait for scientific confirmation. Schools closed as panicked parents kept their children home. Local stores ran out of bottled water within hours as residents stockpiled supplies. The city's helpline was overwhelmed with calls from frightened citizens demanding answers that nobody yet had. Karen Williams, meanwhile, had appointed herself as the unofficial spokesperson for the community's concerns. She gave interviews to local news stations, appeared on radio talk shows, and organized what she called concerned citizen meetings in her living room. Her narrative was compelling in its simplicity. A foreign doctor with suspicious background had betrayed the community's trust and attempted mass murder through water contamination. We welcomed her into our community, Karen told Channel 7 News, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. We trusted her with our health, with our children's health. And this is how she repays our kindness. It makes you wonder who else might be plotting against us. The story went viral. Within 24 hours, Riverside Heights was trending on social media platforms, with thousands of people sharing Karen's interviews and expressing outrage at what they perceived as a terror attack on innocent Americans. The hashtag #RiversideStrong began appearing alongside increasingly inflammatory rhetoric about Muslim immigrants and the dangers of unchecked diversity. Dr. Hassan, trapped in her house by reporters and increasingly hostile neighbors, watched her life disintegrate on live television. Someone had thrown eggs at her front door during the night, and she could see protesters gathering across the street, holding signs with slogans like "Deport Terrorists" and "America First." Her phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, death threats from strangers, and a few supportive messages from colleagues and friends who knew her character. The breaking point came Saturday evening. A group of about 200 protesters had gathered in front of City Hall, demanding immediate action against Dr. Hassan and any other suspicious foreign nationals in the community. The crowd had grown increasingly agitated as the day wore on, fueled by inflammatory social media posts and the arrival of several prominent anti-immigrant activists who had driven in from neighboring cities to capitalize on the crisis. Karen stood on the City Hall steps, a megaphone in her hand, addressing the crowd with the fervor of a revival preacher. She had never felt so powerful, so important, so listened to. The attention was intoxicating, and she fed off the crowd's energy like a vampire drawing blood. "They want us to wait for test results," she shouted. "They want us to be patient while our children are being poisoned. How many more people have to get sick before our so-called leaders take action?" The crowd roared its approval. Someone in the back began chanting, "Lock her up!" And soon, the entire group had taken up the chant. The sound echoed off the building's facade like thunder, while police officers in riot gear watched nervously from behind their protective barriers. Detective Sarah Chen had been working around the clock since the crisis began, following leads that all seemed to lead nowhere. The FBI terrorism experts had found no evidence of actual contamination, no suspicious activities around water treatment facilities, no credible intelligence suggesting any kind of plot. But the absence of evidence wasn't stopping the crisis from escalating. As she watched the crowd grow more violent, Detective Chen couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was wrong with the entire narrative. She had met Dr. Hassan several times during community events, and the woman's dedication to helping others seemed genuine. More importantly, the detective's investigative instincts told her that real terrorists don't announce their attacks through community meeting arguments. The crowd's chanting grew louder and more menacing. Someone hurled a bottle that shattered against the building's windows, and suddenly, the peaceful protest transformed into something much darker. Police moved to form a protective line, but they were vastly outnumbered by protesters whose fear had curdled into rage. "We know where she lives," someone shouted from the crowd. "Why are we wasting time here when we could be getting justice ourselves?" Detective Chen felt her blood run cold. She knew exactly what getting justice meant to an angry mob, and she had seen enough lynch mob mentalities in her career to recognize the warning signs. She grabbed her radio and called for immediate backup at Dr. Hassan's address, then began pushing through the crowd toward her patrol car. As she drove through the streets toward Elm Street, Detective Chen could see groups of people walking in the same direction, their faces hard with purpose. Some carried baseball bats or other makeshift weapons. This was no longer about water contamination or public safety. This had become something much more primitive and dangerous. She reached Dr. Hassan's house just as the first wave of protesters arrived. The doctor was visible through her front window, pacing back and forth while talking on the phone, probably to her lawyer or family members. She seemed unaware of the gathering storm outside her door. Detective Chen parked her car in the driveway and walked quickly to the front door, ringing the bell repeatedly. When Dr. Hassan answered, her face was streaked with tears, and her usually immaculate appearance showed signs of the stress she had been under. "Dr. Hassan, I'm Detective Chen with the Riverside Heights Police. You need to come with me right now. It's not safe for you to stay here." "But this is my home," Dr. Hassan said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't done anything wrong. Why should I have to run?" The sound of approaching voices and footsteps made the decision for them. Detective Chen could see flashlights and torches bobbing in the darkness as the crowd approached, their angry voices carrying clearly in the still night air. "Because sometimes being right isn't enough to keep you alive," Detective Chen replied grimly. "We can discuss justice later. Right now, we need to focus on survival." They slipped out the back door just as the first protesters reached the front yard. Detective Chen's unmarked car was parked in the alley behind the house, and they managed to drive away just as the crowd began throwing rocks at Dr. Hassan's windows. The sound of breaking glass followed them down the alley like an accusation. As they drove toward the police station, Dr. Hassan stared out the window at her burning neighborhood. Someone had apparently set fire to her mailbox and spoke in a voice hollow with grief and disbelief. "I became a doctor to save lives. I came to America because I believed it was a place where good people could build good lives. I never imagined that helping sick people could be twisted into something so ugly." Detective Chen glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Ma'am, I've been investigating this case since it started, and I want you to know that I don't believe you had anything to do with this water situation, but I need your help to prove it." The breakthrough came Sunday morning, not from brilliant detective work or FBI intelligence, but from Karen Williams' own arrogance and a teenager's boredom. 16-year-old Jake Morrison had been grounded for the weekend after getting caught vaping in the school bathroom, which meant he was stuck at home while his friends were out enjoying their freedom. To pass the time, he had been scrolling through his mother's laptop, looking for anything interesting, when he noticed that she had left her email account open. Jake's mother, Linda Morrison, served on the city council, and was friends with Karen Williams. As Jake scrolled through his mother's recent emails, looking for anything that might give him leverage to reduce his grounding sentence, he found a chain of messages between his mother and Karen that made his teenage understanding of right and wrong recoil in disgust. The emails, sent in the days leading up to Karen's 911 call, revealed the calculated nature of her plan. She had researched Dr. Hassan's background, looking for any detail that could be twisted to support a narrative of suspicion. She had coordinated with several other residents to create the appearance of widespread illness symptoms. Most damning of all, she had explicitly stated her intention to teach that foreign bitch a lesson about showing me up in public. Jake stared at the computer screen, his teenage brain struggling to process the magnitude of what he was reading. He had always thought of Mrs. Williams as just another annoying adult. But this was something else entirely. This was evil, dressed up in suburban respectability and justified by wounded pride. Without really thinking about the consequences, Jake took screenshots of the most damning emails and posted them to his Instagram story with the caption, "Holy shit, my mom's friend is literally trying to get someone killed because she lost an argument." Within an hour, the screenshots had been shared hundreds of times, and by Sunday evening, they were trending across multiple social media platforms. Detective Chen first learned about the leaked emails when her phone started buzzing with calls from reporters and fellow officers. She was at her desk, reviewing witness statements for the 100th time, when her lieutenant walked over with a printout of the Instagram post. "Sarah, you need to see this. Looks like your instincts were right about the Hassan case." As Detective Chen read through the emails, she felt a mixture of vindication and rage. Vindication because her investigative instincts had been correct all along, and rage because of how easily fear and prejudice had been weaponized to destroy an innocent person's life. The water test results came back Sunday night, confirming what Detective Chen and the FBI had suspected all along. There was no contamination. The municipal water supply was completely safe, well within all health standards, and showed no signs of tampering or foreign substances. By Monday morning, the story had completely flipped. Karen Williams went from being seen as a heroic whistleblower who had exposed a terrorist plot to being recognized as a racist who had fabricated a crisis to satisfy her personal vendetta. The news media, which had been so eager to cover the terrorism angle, now pivoted to covering the hoax that tore a community apart. The legal consequences came swiftly. Karen was arrested on charges of filing false police reports, inciting public panic, and making terroristic threats. The district attorney, recognizing the seriousness of the case and the damage it had caused, announced that they would be seeking the maximum penalty allowed under state law. Dr. Hassan returned to work at the hospital on Tuesday morning to find a crowd of colleagues, patients, and community members waiting to welcome her back. The hospital administration had issued a formal apology and announced that they would be implementing new policies to prevent discrimination against staff members based on religion or ethnicity. The community began the long process of healing, but the scars would remain visible for years to come. Property damage from the riots had been significant, and several businesses owned by minority families had been vandalized during the height of the crisis. Trust, once broken, would take time and effort to rebuild. Karen Williams's trial became a media sensation, with legal experts calling it a landmark case in the prosecution of social media-fueled hate crimes. Her defense attorney argued that she had genuinely believed her accusations and was simply trying to protect her community. But the leaked emails made it impossible to maintain that fiction. The judge, in sentencing Karen to 2 years in prison and 5 years of probation, delivered a statement that would be quoted in law schools and civil rights seminars for years to come. The defendant did not act in a moment of passion or genuine fear, but rather engaged in a calculated campaign of deception designed to harm an innocent person because of her race and religion. In doing so, she weaponized the very systems designed to protect our community and turned them against one of our most valuable citizens. A free society cannot tolerate such abuse of public trust. Dr. Hassan, who had attended every day of the trial, spoke to reporters outside the courthouse after the sentencing. "I don't celebrate anyone going to prison," she said, her voice steady and composed. "But I hope this case sends a message that there are consequences for spreading hatred and fear. I also hope it reminds us all that we have a responsibility to think carefully before we believe or share accusations against our neighbors." The financial penalties were severe as well. Karen's homeowner's insurance refused to cover the civil lawsuits filed against her, and she was forced to sell her house and liquidate her assets to pay damages to Dr. Hassan and the other victims of her hoax. The woman who had once lived in comfortable suburban privilege found herself facing bankruptcy and social ostracism. Detective Sarah Chen was promoted to sergeant and given a commendation for her role in uncovering the truth. She used her newfound platform to advocate for better training on bias crimes and the importance of thorough investigation, even in cases that seem to confirm popular prejudices. 6 months after the crisis, Riverside Heights held its first annual Unity Festival in the renovated park that had been the source of the original argument. Dr. Hassan served on the organizing committee, working alongside former critics who had since recognized their mistakes and committed to building a more inclusive community. The festival drew thousands of visitors from across the region, featuring food trucks representing dozens of different cultures, musical performances from local artists of all backgrounds, and booths staffed by community organizations dedicated to fighting prejudice and promoting understanding. Jake Morrison, the teenager whose Instagram post had helped expose the truth, was recognized with a special Youth Leadership Award for his courage in speaking out against injustice. In his acceptance speech, he challenged other young people to question narratives that seem designed to divide communities. Adults sometimes get so caught up in their own drama that they forget to think about whether what they're doing is actually right, he said, his young voice carrying surprising wisdom. But we don't have to wait until we're older to stand up for what's right. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is just tell the truth, even when it's hard. As the sun set over the Unity Festival, Dr. Hassan stood near the renovated playground, watching children of all backgrounds playing together while their parents chatted in the comfortable way of neighbors who had learned to see past surface differences. The rose garden she had planted in her backyard was blooming again, tended by community volunteers during her temporary exile. The crisis had revealed both the worst and best of human nature, the speed with which fear could be weaponized, but also the resilience of truth and the power of ordinary people to choose compassion over hatred. Riverside Heights had survived its trial by fire and emerged stronger, more aware of its vulnerabilities, but also more committed to protecting all of its citizens. Karen Williams would serve her sentence and eventually be released, but she would find a very different world waiting for her, one in which the consequences of hatred had been made clear and the value of diversity had been reaffirmed. Whether she would learn from her mistakes or remain trapped in her resentment was a question only time could answer. But for Dr. Hassan and the thousands of people who had stood with her, the lesson was clear. Truth may sometimes travel slower than lies, but it has the power to outlast them. In a world where social media can amplify both hatred and hope with equal efficiency, the choice of which voice to amplify remains with each individual. The people of Riverside Heights had chosen hope, and in doing so, they had chosen their better angels. The water flowed clean and clear through the pipes beneath their streets, carrying with it the promise of renewal and the possibility of redemption. Some wounds heal completely, while others leave scars that serve as reminders of lessons learned. The community had chosen to let their scars become sources of strength rather than shame, proof that ordinary people can overcome extraordinary challenges when they commit to seeing the humanity in one another. As Dr. Hassan locked up the free clinic after another successful Saturday morning, she paused to read the new plaque that had been installed by the front door, in honor of all who serve their communities with dedication and compassion, regardless of where they were born or how they worship. May this place always be a sanctuary for healing and hope. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a community's promise to never again let fear override justice or prejudice defeat compassion. In the end, that promise would prove to be Karen Williams' greatest failure and Dr. Hassan's most enduring victory.